75 years ago this week, the Soviet army was on the verge of liberating the Auschwitz death camp. The Nazis murdered more than 1 million people there during the Holocaust, almost all of them Jews. It was just one of many such camps in Nazi-occupied Europe. But Auschwitz stands out as a symbol of the systemic slaughter of Jews and other groups. Today, how the Holocaust is remembered is as much an issue of politics as it is history. And to walk us through a week of difficult commemoration is William Croft in Berlin, is political correspondent with our partners DW. He's been talking to my colleague Mamavi Owusu-Abuaje.
75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp. That's where Nazis exterminated more than 1 million people, most of them Jews, during the Holocaust between 1939 and 1945. And given how big of a tragedy happened specifically at Auschwitz, the liberation of it has become International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That would be January 27th, this coming Monday. And in advance of that, leaders from around the world are taking part in a number of events in a number of places. It's quite a whirlwind of events, starting in earnest tomorrow in Israel, where the Israeli president and prime minister are hosting a few dozen state leaders and leaders of government from around the world, including Vice President Mike Pence, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, France's President Emmanuel Macron, just to name a few. They are all being hosted at an anti-Semitism conference taking place at Yad Vashem. This is Israel's central Holocaust memory center, remembrance center, and research place of research of anti-Semitism. And they'll be gathered for the day to discuss anti-Semitism in the world today and how to confront it. Of course, it's full of symbolism, with many critics wondering what will be the tangible political action to come out of this event about anti-Semitism. Important to note that, of course, anti-Semitism is not only about Jews and threat to Jewish people all around the world, but really affects everyone, because people who are anti-Semitic, who have anti-Semitic views and are especially carry out violence against Jews, tend to also have violent views of Muslims, of other groups, people of color. So this really is a problem that affects everyone, and that is what these kinds of events are going to focus on. And from there, we're going to have many of these world leaders flying together, including the German president and the Israeli president, to Poland, where over the weekend into Monday, into the actual Remembrance Day, there will be an event at Auschwitz, at the death camp itself, along with survivors of that camp, remembering that day, which will then extend back here in Berlin, the German capital, at the German Bundestag, where the Israeli president will be hosted, so a change of roles, for a commemoration at the parliament here in Germany. So that's just a few of the many events going on to mark a very historic and tragic occasion.
William, how is the current political situation complicating matters?
Well, it's rather ironic because we're seeing a rise in nationalism in countries all around the world, especially in Poland, in Russia, in the United States, countries that played, of course, a huge role both as victims and perpetrators in World War II and in the Holocaust. And it's nationalism that, of course, fueled World War II and the Holocaust. And now, because of these nationalist tendencies, we see political leaders in countries trying to rewrite history, or at least shape the debate about who is at fault, who were victims, who were perpetrators, and how this all began. It's amazing that 75 years later, this is still such a relevant topic and informs a lot of the relations between countries. For example, Israel invited to this anti-Semitism conference that I mentioned the Polish president, but he was denied a chance to speak at this event, whereas Russia's President Vladimir Putin is being allowed to speak. That incensed Polish leaders for not having a chance to present their view of history, and the Polish delegation pulled out and will not be attending the conference in Israel. Meanwhile, already in the weeks leading up to the Holocaust Remembrance Day, there's been a lot of political and diplomatic barbs being traded between, for example, Poland and Russia, as both have accused the other side of playing a role in instigating the Holocaust, being a collaborator in the Holocaust, helping Nazi Germany exterminate many of Europe's Jews. 6 million Jews, let's not forget, were murdered in the Holocaust, and 5 million other people from other groups were murdered in death camps such as Auschwitz. So we're seeing a chance, or the efforts of many of these countries to try to shape history and how we remember 75 years later based on relations today. As we know, relations between Poland and Russia, between Russia and the United States, between Israel and Poland are very fraught with a lot of different tensions, and that is seeping in to how we remember the Holocaust. So it's very much not just a question for historians, it's also a question for politicians and leaders of countries.
Interesting you say that, because I was just going to ask why you think this anniversary especially is significant.
Right. Well, anytime an anniversary of anything ends in a 5 or a 0, it tends to be a big one. This is the 75th anniversary, so of course there's going to be lots of remembrance events and the like going on both in Poland and, as I mentioned, in Germany and in Israel. And this is a Remembrance Day marked all around the world, but specifically right now we're looking at an increasingly dwindling number of Holocaust survivors. Estimates put only just a few 100,000 survivors left around the world. That may sound like a big number, but let's not forget many of the people who survived the Holocaust were very, very young at the time. Their memories are sketchy and they're getting old. It's getting more difficult for them to speak. Many memories are going. And it's getting harder for them to travel to these kinds of commemoration events. And in 5 years, looking ahead to the next big anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp, you're seeing possibly next to no survivors being left in the world, which means that direct contact that people have with the Holocaust will be gone. And remembrance in the Holocaust for all of these years since is based on firsthand knowledge of what happened. And when that's gone, the question remains, what do we do then? What do countries and governments and political leaders and organizations that try to remember the Holocaust, what do they base their memory in when firsthand knowledge is gone? So that makes this year possibly the last year where there's so many survivors still left to speak, a very important one.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.
William Croft there explaining to Mamavi Uswabaje the Holocaust and its commemoration. Certainly a very difficult moment it was for Europe.